That is good to know.
Hello, welcome to the Yaoi Shelf.
Hello.
Grab a seat and relax. If this bravado is working, it's because it is 7:03 in the morning. Carola has once again managed to be in the best time zone,
I'm
and
sorry.
we have a person who is approximately 150% more brilliant and intelligent than either of us combined joining us on the show.
Thank you. Yeah, hi. That is too kind. But anyway, thank you. Do I
No.
need to introduce myself or you're going to introduce me?
You know what? I would love it if you introduce yourself, and if we feel like you were not sufficiently apt with displaying your eminence and ability, we will be sure to add on.
You're far too kind. So my name is James Welker, and I am a professor in the Department of Cross-Cultural Studies in the faculty of, cross-cultural and Japanese studies. It's a relatively new faculty. We've restructured, and the names I can't keep the names straight or anything else at that point. But anyway, at Kanagawa University in Yokohama, Japan. So if you follow my Instagram and you are following in late autumn through the winter, I have some marvelous photos of Mount Fuji that I can take from my office.
I've seen those. They're amazing.
Yeah.
That is like the one thing that I didn't really get to see when I was in Japan. I was in October. I did not get to see Mount Fuji. There are, however, several images of me at gachapon machines making little gremlin faces.
That is far more important than Mount Fuji. Mount Fuji is shy, and you need to know where it is. And
yes.
It's because you can often make out the shadow of it, especially at dusk, but you need to know exactly where to look, unless it's a clear day.
I just realized I've never seen it. I've been 3 times, and I was like, wait, I've never seen Mount Fuji.
Yeah, this is what happens when you send a couple of Fujin to Japan. There's photos of me at an owl cafe having a religious experience because I'm holding an owl, and a lot of images of me looking like Gollum from Lord of the Rings in front of a gachapon machine.
I mean, I just live in Otama Road, and then I go to see, Gakt. So
Okay.
that's why I go.
So I assume you know who Erica Friedman is.
Yeah.
The premier Yuri fan of all. She and her wife visit Japan prior to the pandemic, relatively recently, and somehow, no matter what time of year it is, they always manage to see Mount Fuji. I don't know how.
What?
They just have this gift. Maybe it's Patty's gift, Erica's wife. Her gift.
Maybe.
That's
But
amazing.
we are here, it's Pride Month here in the US.
I totally forgot about that, but I'm wearing a Pride shirt.
Yeah.
I love that. I'm wearing all black because I live in Texas, and my state has decided that it doesn't know what human rights are anymore.
I'm sorry.
I'm so sorry.
I am too. But Carola and I felt like it was important that as we go into Pride, as some of the discourse has been particularly spicy recently, that we actually talk about BL scholarship and what it is, why it matters. Because on this show, we are very, very pro BL scholarship, and we say it all the time. We're affluent about it. But in doing that, I think both of us realized we haven't talked about what that is outside of us. Like, instead of baseball cards, it's academics for us. We don't really have baseball cards or anything. It's little printed out. It's oh yeah, I have a it's this one academic that 5 people have heard about.
I'll trade you my PDF for that.
Yeah, I'll trade you this PDF for this other book that only exists in 2 languages. So we brought on we brought on someone who we felt like not only is one of the best at explaining the importance of BL scholarship, but also why it matters to all of us. Because I can already hear it in, the comments somewhere, someone saying, well, I just want to watch boys doing gay stuff. It's okay, that's, same.
Thumbs up. I was doing a thumbs up gesture. Yeah, thumbs up all around. None of us have a problem with that. But to those who, in the echo of Dr. Thomas Baudet saying,
that we have been, as a fandom, engaging with this stuff critically, many of us for decades, it's important to discuss why this matters and, maybe even how to dip your toes in it if you are, scholarship curious. If it's Pride and you discover...
If you're secretly a closet academic, which
if you're a closet
happened to me, it happened to me, Amanda.
Yeah. I was I was too aggressive of an English major to be a closet academic. I was just running around with like, I have a PDF.
No, I literally had my professor, who was also guiding me through my bachelor's thesis. He slid my draft across the table and he went in his Irish accent, "I hate to tell you this, but you might be an academic." And I was like, oh no.
But with that being said, I would love to know maybe how you got your start in BL academia, because I think both of us have explained how we got our start in like fandom media and fan studies. Mine was against my will. I had my senior research symposium and I really wanted to talk about some other kind of film. And my teacher was like, "Don't you run the anime club?" It's like, yes. Like, why don't you do something on anime? And I was like, damn it. Like, I was really trying to be like serious business because, I had the Western brainwashing of you can't be an adult and watch anime and cartoons for children. So it's like, I was going to talk about serious film like Quentin Tarantino. But anime was beneath me.
Oh yeah, and look at you now.
Yeah. So if you look at manga and anime studies in general, like a lot of the early stuff is written by so-called aka fans, and I'm not honestly sure what aka fan means. Is it somebody who starts out as a fan and then they become an academic? Is it somebody who does a lot of research but they don't have a PhD and they're not publishing in the same like elite gate-kept forums? But there are a lot of like early scholars in general who are doing that. And then there are people who became like scholars, especially like scholars of Japanese literature or something like that. And then they either got interested in manga and anime because their students were doing it. And so they took that Japanese literary background to manga and anime and then started applying it. And so that's where you get a lot of interesting textual analysis, but a lot of the earlier stuff wasn't really paying a lot of attention to visual, right? Or you get somebody who's doing film studies and they turn to anime and they might or might not be an expert on Japan itself. And they might mostly know what they know about Japan from other scholarship rather than from their own firsthand experience. So me, I like to preface a lot of talks that I give, and also I teach a manga and anime course, and I have for many, many, many years. I like to preface it all with saying I am not a fan. However, and then I usually pause for like the shock.
Yes.
However, I have over time become a huge fan of fandom, and I get so excited about the fandom and how enthused fans are. And so that's kind of where my heart is at the moment. And I'll get back to how I got into this. But so yeah, maybe I'll just do that now because my brain has just switched gears.
Go ahead.
Basically, I was doing a master's degree through the University of Sheffield in the UK because I wanted to just work on my Japanese. They had this distance learning kind of degree. I wanted to work on my Japanese, and instead of doing an MA thesis, you had the option of doing an annotated translation. And I thought, oh, that's cool. It's better for my Japanese than just doing research and writing a paper in English. I'll translate something because, when you translate, then you're really forced to confront, like, you're looking at the deeper layers of the language, right? If you're actually trying to understand it fully and then convey it naturally in English. So I was thinking I wanted to do something lesbian and gay related, and lesbian and gay was kind of more the term. This is a while ago. This is more than 20 years ago. It was lesbian and gay rather than LGBT and or LGBTQ plus or whatever. I wanted to do something either like or lesbian and gay related or feminist related, and this was right around 2000, and there were a number of books on Japanese feminism in Japan, and so I thought, well, me translating something isn't necessarily going to be a big contribution. Then I looked at something about gay men in Japan, and Mark McClelland had just come out with a book on male homosexuality in Japan. So I'm like, oh, I wonder what's written about lesbians, and I'm looking and not finding anything because the internet was not as good back then. And research tools in general were not as good back then. So I thought, you know what I'll do? I'll do something related to the lesbian community. I'll do something that would actually put some information in English. So I ended up translating this series of roundtable discussions that was in this lesbian magazine called Anis on the lesbian community history. And they had different themes, like 6 different themes. Like community activism, film festivals, blah, blah, blah. And they had one roundtable on media. And in the media, this was Mizoguchi Akiko, or Akiko Mizoguchi, you might know as a really important BL scholar in Japan, who has some stuff out in English and other languages. It was Mizoguchi Akiko and Hagiwara Mami. And sorry, I am always doing Japanese names in Japanese order because that's how we write in English.
No, all of our listeners are weebs. They're fine.
Okay.
Yeah, we do that too. I also think Mizoguchi Akiko, she's on YouTube now, isn't she?
She may well be.
I think she does have a YouTube channel.
Yeah, she's done some really important work. But anyway, so it was Mizoguchi Akiko and Hagiwara Mami. And instead of somehow they just ended up talking about Shonen Ai. And Mizoguchi Akiko, in that interview, and she's written this other places, famously said it was through consuming Shonen Ai in the 70s that she became a lesbian. Now, if we get into trans issues later on, and I hope we do, I don't think that's exactly true, but I think it probably defines how she was exposed to the possibility of same-sex relationships, and that gave her something to look at in terms of her identity. Even there wouldn't have been identity words in the text that they were talking about. This is Heart of Toma and the Song of the Wind in the Trees. Anyway, so I'm like, well, that's fascinating. Why aren't they talking about lesbian manga? Which at the time I wasn't very familiar. I ended up going off and trying to find all of the lesbian manga that I possibly could. And I ended up finding Fujimoto Yukari, who's a really well-known scholar of shoujo manga. Fujimoto Yukari's book had a whole chapter on it. And so some of that, I think it's mostly been translated into English as well. But in any case, so I found that, I read everything. I ended up writing something about kind of tracing the history of representation of lesbians, and I think I was basically using the word lesbians. This is kind of right before Yuri, right at the moment Yuri became a term in both English and in Japanese and other languages. So anyway, but then a friend of mine said, well, why don't you write about the gay stuff? And so I wrote this analysis of Toma no Shinzo, or Heart of Toma, and Kaze Toki no Uta, or the Song of the Wind in the Trees. I wrote this. I was actually between my master's degree and I had applied to a PhD program. I was between that and I wrote this. And so this article called Beautiful, Borrowed, and Bent, which somehow miraculously I got into a really top feminist journal called Signs. And then I couldn't stop. I continued to research feminisms. I continued to research lesbians or lesbian community, bisexual women, and community and so forth. But I just never managed to get away, which is fine because it's great. Because there's just so much more to dig through. Anyway, so that's...
No, yeah. I mean, it was almost comforting to hear you say it that way, because I feel like Carola and I are probably in pretty similar boats of we found gay stuff and we didn't leave.
Yeah. And then we just kept digging deeper.
Yeah.
And now look.
Yeah, and to talk about queer identity and finding it through shonen and yaoi, that was absolutely my path.
Yeah.
I started fan translating in my school library when I was in high school, and doing fan dubs and writing as a male, and it was like another part of me clicked in. It was like, oh, that's what it is. And it was wonderful. So now I'm very, very proudly female assigned at birth, but a gender fluid bisexual. And I would never have found that really if it wasn't for embodying several problematic fictional blonde anime men.
No names mentioned, but
0 names mentioned. But there were a couple of things in there that I would love to dig into. Yes.
Just keep going. We have started recording, so I have to go let my cat in because he needs to disturb always.
Carola has the most wonderful cat named Sansa.
Maybe the cat will show up in a little bit. We'll see.
The cat might show up.
But what you were saying about like this writing as male characters, or this you hear in so many different cultural situations, and how this has come to help people understand how they feel about themselves and how they feel about other people, regardless of gender or because of gender. When since we're talking about academics, I will go ahead and start grabbing books off my table.
Yes,
please.
So I'm holding up here the issue 13 number 1. So volume 13, number 1 of the journal Macadamia. Not macadamia like the nut, macadamia like Mecca, as in. I struggle
so much with this publication.
Everybody calls it macadamia, and then it's Mecca plus academia. So macadamia. I edited an issue of this on queering, like queer, and then in parentheses ing, queering. So this is in 2021 that this came out, and I was looking for. I assume we're going to go in all random order, so it's fine that we're not. At all.
There is no path. We are on a boat together.
Excellent. So I was the macadamia. Normally they invite submissions, and then the submissions are reviewed. They choose the ones that they think will best fit the issue. And what I wanted to do was the submissions were just something to do with queer Japan or East Asia media, like mostly games, manga, anime. Tom Bodnet, who you've referred to already, he has an article in here. But what I wanted to do was create little snapshots of the kind of global BL Yuri, etc. Fan community that doesn't exist in any sort of citable, usable. There is the cat now. Citable, usable form, and so I started reaching out, asking different people. I wanted to try to cover as many regions as possible. And I ended up finding a librarian in St. Petersburg, Russia, who wrote about online, I guess it's not really crossplay because it's online, but online kind of enacting of male BL characters that led to real life romantic relationships sometimes between the women. And I mentioned this to probably Fujimoto Yukari, who I work with now. It's so cool because like when I was like a grad student, she was just like this, oh my God, she's so amazing. And now I work with her. I mean, she's still amazing, but
that's literally us right now.
And you're really too kind. But anyway, so I mentioned this to Professor Fujimoto, and she's like, yeah, that happens. And she started listing all the other countries she's heard about that in. And I'm like, oh, but still I have, and it's documented here in the context of Russia. But yeah, I mean, I think that's like super, super common.
Yeah, we did an episode called the Fujin Pipeline in which we discussed that, like, a lot of us, especially, it was like a very, very interesting, like, almost like closed phenomena of those of us that started reading, in the early mid 2000s, which I hate admitting was 20 years ago. I'm contractually obligated because both of us have birthdays next month. So that was 20 years ago.
I don't want to talk about it.
It is in the contract. You signed it. You signed it when you joined on. That many of us did start out like this. And, we were cis, or about as cis as teenage girls are. Let's be realistic. About as cis as most teenage girls are. And, you start writing boys having a lot of sex, and suddenly it's like, well, wait a second. Am I cis? What does that mean? Am I attracted to women and men, or am I attracted to a very, like, effeminate coding of men? I role play, and my last long-term partner and I used to date, and through the process of role playing and writing, usually as men, we ended up not only falling in love, but my partner came out as a trans man. So you have me, aggressively gender fluid, feeling very, very comfortable writing and, occasionally embodying male roles. And then my partner found an entire whole other identity. So it's comforting to hear that, outside of anecdotal or isolated, experiences with it, that, yeah, that's a much more, that's a broader phenomenon. And we were able to touch on it a little bit in the Fujin Pipeline, because even though we have anecdotes, we also are horrible monsters that live, breathe, and sleep on the internet.
Oh, God.
Well, I mean, and when you look at, and anecdotes, they're great, but if I don't want to do my own original research, but I want to reference something, it makes it so much easier if there's something that's actually written down in a forum like Macadamia, not
Absolutely.
Macadamia, that is citable, even if it's not a peer-reviewed, the gold standard of academic writing. It's not peer-reviewed. That section is, the journal is, but the section is not peer-reviewed. But you've got something that's describing this in another context, so you can easily say, that this also happens in Russia. There's another piece that was written about Israel and written about crossplay and then trans identities, and kind of the line between crossplay and trans identities in the context of Israel, right? And so, I mean, which makes it, and you all know this, like how global this phenomenon is. We're in 3 very, very different time zones. So, and
yes. No, that's phenomenal. And, every once in a while my brain does revert back to being a very, very dumb American, where the sun and the moon revolve around the great United States of America. So, like, even though, like, the logical part of my brain knows it, like, it was still, like, a little bit shocking to me. It's like, oh yeah, like, they would do this stuff other places. Because especially, like, American fandom for many, many years, we were very, very isolated. We didn't talk to other people that weren't Americans. And usually because of, frankly, our xenophobia, we didn't try to talk to other people when we had the options. Some of us did, hence why my best friend is Norwegian now. But many of us, even when presented with the opportunity to speak to other people, we chose not to. And I think that's still one of the biggest issues in American fandom, is our very insular view of how this is, and that we do make it sound like we are the only ones who have ever experienced this ever. But then someone will, wave a flag somewhere else and it's like, no, just us.
Yeah, and also holding the entire world to the standards, to those cultural standards in particular. Yeah.
No. And I hate it. I hate it every time. I hate that there's mangaka that know what anti and pro shit mean. I hate that. Every day I wake up and that's a reality for me. I hate it.
Well, I have many, many, many thoughts. But one of the things, in defense of Americans, if you didn't grow up in the US and you didn't go through American education, you really are taught that the US is the center of the world and the best country in the world. And I mean, everybody learns that their country is a wonderful country, but not many countries teach. There are a few others, but not many teach that you're the center of the world. And then you also happen to speak English, which is theoretically the global language. So, yeah, well, that was one thought. No, I've lost others. So let's.
No, it's true. And especially coming from Texas, we teach like the center of America is Texas, and we're the greatest, biggest state. We can still secede from the Union, which I assume means taking a saw to the border of Texas and floating off into the Gulf of Mexico.
Bugs Bunny did that with Florida, but
literally, I guess like that's what they assume that secession, like seceding from the Union, means, is just hacking away and I guess detaching from Mexico somehow. But there was yes.
Oh, and I wanted to go back to the language thing. I think one of the things that English-speaking fans sometimes forget is how fandom exists in many other languages. And now, if you are from Norway, for example, and you happen to speak English fluently, sure, you're probably participating, at least online, more in English than, I'm guessing more in English just based on interacting with global fans. But, and you can correct me if I'm wrong about that, but
no, actually, what's really interesting is that this new generation, why am I hearing myself? Why is there an echo?
That's a good question.
Well, one of these interesting things about like the new generation coming out of Norwegian fans is that they communicate. I mean, we generally communicate between us in English as well, so not only on the internet, but like in person. Like I speak English to a lot of my friends in my daily life, but like in fandom circuits, you see that when people are cosplaying, for instance, they will communicate in English, and that's how they stay in character. So it's very interesting how the entire fandom experience seems to be in English, and we don't have a lot of Norwegian language, like fandom language. We just use the English one, in some cases the Japanese or like the Chinese equivalents, like
right. I mean, that makes sense, right? If the text you're consuming are primarily in English, then, or even if you are able to read Japanese or Chinese, even, if you're one of those rare gems, not that this, you don't need to, but in any case, you're still communicating about these texts in English because you're talking to fans who don't read and speak Japanese. So I've gone to the Philippines a few times to go to fan events there. And one of the things that I was really fascinated by is how much English is a part of the fandom as well. I think there's a lot more mixing. I was paying attention and I was asking my friend Kirsten Santos. She publishes academically as Christine Michelle Santos. Kirsten, I think she's just at Kirsten on Twitter. She's great.
She's amazing.
I was asking her, she's sort of like and she's like, yeah, which is so what? Like, yeah, this is just how we talk. We mix languages, it's fine. But yeah, and I have a feeling though that it's related to that the text, why would you, if the people consuming these texts also read English, why would you translate them into Tagalog? Because, there are local BL, there's local BL that's produced in Tagalog, but if, stuff is circulating in English already. And if you want to interact with a more global fandom, then, fans in wherever, Malaysia or South Africa or Scandinavia or whatever, it's English.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I still struggle with like the legacy of colonialism, even though I'm African American. I still struggle with like that colonial legacy that America has with like a lot of culture in general is dominated by English. Like that's something that I almost like on an existential level have been kind of thinking about a lot recently. I guess as I get into the age that I'm turning, I feel like I'm approaching death and I'm worried about that. But yeah, like that's fascinating and horrifying to me as an American.
Well, if we want to talk about like the colonial legacy a little bit in terms of language and kind of jump back to BL studies.
Yes.
You sent me in advance like a whole list of questions, and we haven't looked at them, and that's fine.
I'm having a great time and learning a lot, and that's what
yeah.
matters.
Yeah, exactly. So you were one of the questions was related to how somebody could get into BL studies.
Yes.
And, if you are interested in studying BL in Japan, you do need to be able to speak and read Japanese. Your Japanese probably won't be perfect before you come over and either enter a graduate program in Japan, or you are coming for a year or two to do research. But you really do need to engage with local scholars, well, obviously the artists themselves, and if you're doing like textual analysis, you need to be able to read it. And it takes time to develop that. I mean, I've lived in Japan for literally decades at this point, but I think there's a little bit too much and this is not just BL scholarship. This is in manga, anime scholarship, fan scholarship in general that's focused on Japan. Most people, whatever their training, they've learned Japanese and they're coming over and they're doing research. But I think there can this idea that you can just kind of pop over, go to a few events, and then write something out academically when you've never actually lived in a culture and you may speak Japanese, but you're not picking up I don't feel like I'm catching all the nuances of stuff sometimes, right? So I think we need to be really mindful of that if you decide that you're interested in doing BL scholarship, you need to think about the focus. And if you're going to write about Japan, or you're going to write about Korea or Thailand or China, you need to master the culture, not in a kind of scary, master way, but you need to have a
Thank you for prefacing. We appreciate that.
Yeah. But right, and I think that's important.
No, I totally agree. I think we both, Carola and I, have the wonderful luxury of knowing many people that are academics in this space, and I think the ones that we're blessed to know are all. They probably wouldn't say that they're masters, but they're either masters or very, very, very close. But I certainly have met and engaged with, and probably at one point have been, an armchair academic who had seen one National Geographic special and, assumed that my 20 years of anime meant something,
Well, it does mean something, but it doesn't necessarily mean what you think it means.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It does
Especially when you're dealing with a 20-year-old or more, when a lot of stuff was localized in a different way, in a different mindset. But I mean, if you think about somebody like Erica Friedman, to bring her back up, she decided, she fell in love with Sailor Moon. She's got this story that she tells, and it's fantastic. I don't want to give you all the details, but basically she wanted to read more stuff, and she wanted to consume it while actually paying the artists who are producing the work. And so she learned to read Japanese. Even though she was living in New Jersey, she learned to read Japanese. Now, and she understands a lot of spoken Japanese. I've interpreted for her because she just really doesn't speak it, because she's got no opportunities to speak it. So we've walked around a Yuri event together, and it's really funny. She'll walk up to somebody. Actually, this is all right, this is silly, but it's not silly. And Erica, I love you. She walks up to this circle that she knows, and she walks up, she introduces herself, and she says something like, Erica Friedman does. Is that accent, which is fine, but they had no idea who she was. And then I just simply said, この方はエリカ・フリードマンさんですよ. And then, this is in a much more natural Japanese way of sounding. And they're like, oh my God. They've been communicating. And, you need to spend time. And I'm sure if Erica spent more than a couple of weeks, and she doesn't claim to be, she's definitely an expert on Yuri, but doesn't claim to be a scholar of Japan. She knows a lot more than a lot of people do. But, you got to spend time here if you want to write, if you really want to get into it,
Yeah, absolutely. The all of few days that I spent in Japan, I feel like I simultaneously learned a lot and then absolutely nothing. So
Yeah.
much so that I already very much want to go again.
Well, I think I told my mom, like, after I lived here for maybe 2 or 3 years, everything I said about Japan the first year is wrong. I didn't speak Japanese at the time. I didn't know what was going on. These are just all these assumptions based on stereotypes. And if you have stereotypes in your head, you're going to see them, right?
That's true.
And you need to become good enough friends with people that they start saying, no, that's not correct.
Yeah.
That's misunderstanding.
But no, I appreciate discussing, how someone can get into it, and I appreciate that it is very much rooted in the reality that while yes, there is a space for, on the fan level for us, maybe who are not masters of culture, but definitely have spent years engaging and thinking in this, to take yourself to the next level really does require a mastery that is a little bit deeper than just I've been injecting Japanese media directly into my veins for
Right. But there's some really great work about manga and anime in general and BL specifically that's done by people who don't really speak Japanese very well. And that's fine. It's just you can do certain things. You can only make certain claims.
Yeah.
Yes.
You're not as anyway. So.
No, I totally get it. I think okay, let's pivot back to the questions that we had, even though I'm having a great time.
We'll get distracted immediately, I can tell.
Of course.
So we have a question on here that I think is important to discuss, and that's who is BL scholarship for? And I mean that on both levels. It's who is the study of BL academia for, and then once that academia and scholarship is released, who is it for? Because I think, again, dumb American brain, when there's a bunch of, published books and titles and journals, I know when I was first in university, I went to a small Catholic college, which explains 90% of my sexual deviancy. But I didn't feel like I was important enough to glimpse at some of these things. Like this was, it was the Ark of the Covenant, and I was a lowly, dirty smut eater who was, in the dorms, and I didn't deserve to be in these spaces. And now I revel in it that we have more access. But, I'm sure that there's people that listen to this show that probably do have a little bit of that same, imposter syndrome, inferiority, that this isn't for me. That I can't do this. I am not doctor,
Yeah, well, if you're just talking about reading it, I mean, scholarship in general is for anybody who's interested in it. You have to think, though, I mean, it's a little bit complicated, and there's been criticism of a lot of scholarship, especially things like ethnography, where we're studying, it's often sociologists or anthropologists are going in and participating in a culture and trying to get an understanding of it, and people share their lives, their feelings, their secrets sometimes, and then you write this up. I mean, on the one hand, you are doing this for your career. Right. I mean, I have made a career out of, and it's not just BL, but I mean, this is what I do for a living. So on the most selfish level, there's a little bit of that. But if you look at what most of the time, ideally, I would like to believe most scholars of anything are just trying to contribute to knowledge. Right? We're trying to create a richer understanding of this, of whatever, of just, and in my case, originally Japan specifically, I was, interested in gender and sexuality in Japan, post-war 70s, 80s, contemporary. And so I just want to contribute to an understanding of that, and in which means that if you are somebody, even if you're not a university student or a scholar, if you're interested, by all means, you should be reading it. I mean, granted, I'm somebody who ended up getting a PhD, but when I was living in Japan in the beginning, I was interested in Japan, so I bought a whole bunch of academic books on Japan and I read them because I wanted to know more. And that's what, that's because it's for whoever wants to read it. In the case of BL scholarship, one of the things that I've been kind of blown away by is how interested fans have been in it. That there are fans who know me and they know other scholars, they know who they are, and that tells you that it is working, that people are reading it. And like, so for example, the Queer Transfigurations, which I assume we'll get, which is the latest edited collection that I've done. I'm sure we'll focus on that.
Oh, we're getting there. Don't worry.
We're going to talk about that.
So I, when it came out, and immediately a whole bunch of people, immediately shot to the second or third on Amazon. Like, when I can't remember which category, but it was something in something either gendered, manga, something LGBT literature, something. It shot up, and it was only for like a brief moment, and I was just really happy. But but that just meant that there was this surge of interest. There was this demand, and that wasn't university libraries. They take time, right? This is fans who are interested. And I cannot remember who it was, but I could dig through and find it. Somebody on Twitter with a following of like 70 or 80,000 people, a writer, tweeted just how important the book was to them, because here is, and yeah, if you're not looking, I'm a white cis gay dude, so I'm hardly an oppressed minority in this sphere, but and so I am the name on the book, but it's primarily written by women, and it's primarily written by people from Asia or somewhat from Asia. And the writer, just the person in the tweet, was just talking about how important it was to have this topic discussed by people who are actually part of the culture and understand things really firsthand. So I was at YCon in Paris last December, and somebody came up to me and he's like, "Oh my God, you're really here, and I love your book. I love and it was just made me so happy. Like this, so it meant something just for people to have, like, for people to take their culture seriously. Because I do take it seriously, and I think everybody engaged in BL, most people really are fans. I think most BL scholars are fans, and like I said, I'm a fan more of the fandom, but it's only because people walk up to me like, oh my god, no, that's I was a fan anyway, because I just love the energy. But it's for whoever, right?
So before we talk about the book, I do want to talk about that, because that has been something that Carola and I in our private chat have had several back and forths on, is a statement of, I am not a fan, but I'm a fan of fandom. And a part of me understands the fan of fandom part, because we analogized in a recent episode an aspect of fandom as being like a Goya painting of the Black Sabbath, which is a bunch of people dancing around a goat, and then in the background, a bunch of other very confused people.
Yeah, it's a perfect analogy. That is,
which is a lot of fandom in a nutshell. Here's a bunch of people doing objectively very weird things and having a great time of it.
Yeah.
And then anyone who's not in group is just like, what?
Well, I love festivals.
Yes.
I love any festival. Like, when I was doing my PhD and lived in Illinois, if like a little small town somewhere like had anything festival, I would go, because I love, even if there's nothing there, people are trying to have a good time. And fan events are like festivals.
Yeah.
Yes.
You've got that same, that festive feeling. And, and there's, here, let me get a little academic on you. But, so there's, and I probably screw everything up. It's like, it's
No.
way past it's not past my bedtime, it's past my brain's bedtime. But I think this is this idea of the carnivalesque. I think it comes from Bakhtin, and I cannot get his first name. But in any case, but it's just kind of this, if you think about like, and it's in reference to like Venice Carnival or something like that, where everybody's wearing masks and the rules suddenly don't apply.
Yeah.
And you're a lot freer to do and say what you want. And, so I think these events are festivals, right?
Yeah.
So it's the celebration. So I just love that.
Yeah, I work I'm an organizer for one of the conventions in Norway, and we actually market ourselves as Norway's biggest fan festival. Like that's our tagline, that we're a festival for people with amazing hobbies. Like that's because that's what it is. It's just people coming together and celebrating fandom and meeting like-minded people.
And
Well, the tagline, if you look at the original poster for the comic market, the one that
Comiket, yeah.
Pandemic, Comiket, had like 700,000 people coming, over 3 days or 4 days over that last year.
Yeah.
The very first poster is something like Manga Fan Festival.
Mm.
So it is this festive kind of thing.
It is.
No, 100%. I think, we use convention a lot in the US because I think like that, because everything in America is a corporation.
There's that. I do need to confess though that when I consume works, I often really like them. I just, as I tell my students at the end of the day, if I'm really tired, I'd rather watch a rerun, of Bob's Burgers. And just because I don't have to think. And probably, once it's BL and suddenly I'm analyzing it a little bit. But, I go to these events. I go to events in Japan or go to events wherever. And I come home and I read them. Yeah. And sometimes I'm really amused. And sometimes I just bought it for the cover. And that's, because the covers are pretty and,
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that I can relate to because
Absolutely.
Same, like, I'm a convention panelist. I go to cons and I speak. And when I'm in the hotel after talking about how great anime and manga is for an hour and a half, I'm watching diners, drive-ins, and dives. Like, I'm not going back and then absorbing more anime. It's, Bar Rescue was on for 4 hours. Awesome.
Yeah, or like, I'll be, like I'm currently neck deep in live action BLs. Like, that's all I'm doing with my life. But then I'm like, okay, I need to do something else. I need to relax. I can't be emotional and I can't use any energy. Let me watch a true crime documentary. Like, let me find something.
Let me cool down with some murder.
Yeah, that's literally what I do. I cool down with murder. I'm like, I can't take this anymore.
All right. Here we are. We're going to talk about the book. Are you excited to talk about?
Yes. Right. I know you didn't ask me, but I'm very excited.
Yes. We will get back to a couple more of the questions, but I feel like we've hyped up the book. We need to talk about the book.
Okay.
Let's talk about Queer Transfigurations.
I also have it right here.
Yeah.
I don't have one because they're $60 on Amazon.
Their paperback is out now.
Oh, yeah, thank God.
True. Yeah. There's paperback. Yeah.
Very happy.
But I want it because the cover is done by Penguin Frontier.
I love Penguin Frontier.
My favorite smut artist.
Yeah, this is the cover of the Japanese version, and it's also Penguin Frontier. And actually, so I don't know how well you can see this, and I don't know if people are just listening, but so there's 3 rows of panels, and there's 2 guys. The top panel is 2 guys. You can't see their eyes, but their mouths are sort of, their faces are approaching each other. And the next panel is the torso, and they're leaning into each other. And the editor of this, she was so excited because in Japan, the books have this little kind of band around them called an obi, which is the same thing with the belt and a kimono. And she was just thinking how exciting it would be to peel back to see the last panel.
Yeah, because I was like, I want to see that.
And even then, the mouths are getting closer, but there's no kiss.
Isn't that's the curse of BL?
Yeah.
But so that explains my history. I found out about this book not first because I'm a rampant epidemic. I saw Penguin Frontier. It's like, I'm doing work on this, and it's like, yes.
But it's like I mean, this has nothing to do with anything. I did tag Dr. Welker on Twitter for this because I started watching Moonlight Chicken and I was like, why does this one scene in Moonlight Chicken look exactly like this cover? I was like, and I can't unsee it now. I absolutely can't unsee it.
It's beautiful. Actually, the weird thing about these, so Penguin Frontier, for those people who aren't very familiar with his beautiful, beautiful artwork, Penguin Frontier really loves Japan. And most of his art is so clearly set in Japan. And most of the characters appear to be Japanese, whatever that means. They just appear to be Japanese. And Kirsten Santos, I'd asked everybody to kind of help me find cover art or publicity art, because this was originally the poster for the event that became this. And she suggested Penguin Frontier, and she sent a couple of images. And what I loved about this is because this looks kind of like it could be in Southeast Asia, and you can't really tell whatever, they don't look particularly Japanese. And these guys too, on the Japanese version, it doesn't look as Japan as most of its stuff. And I wanted to use a non-Japanese artist, and I wanted something beautiful, and I wanted something that didn't look necessarily like Japan. So that is accomplished. Yeah. And fortunately, Penguin Frontier kindly consented to let me use his art. So, yes.
That is amazing.
Let's talk about the book. Tell us all about it. Tell us about the effort, time, energy spent into it.
So, this whole started back in 2016. Like, that's how long stuff takes. So this was 2016. This scholar of Thailand, he's a really well-known scholar of Thai Buddhism, but he also works on gender and sexual minorities in Thailand, named Peter Jackson. He's an Australian scholar. He recently retired from Australia National University. He wrote to me and to Mark McClelland and Tom Bodinette and Dredge Kong. Dredge Kong is, so Mark McClelland was, unfortunately, he passed away. He was a scholar based in Australia as well, and works primarily on Japan, and then Dredge works on Thailand. I think he's American, and he is at University of California, San Diego. These affiliations matter to us. That's how we place people in our world. And they really do. Like, you kind of need to place people. And then, I mean, I didn't even go into and Dredge is an anthropologist. Mark was trained in sociology, but mostly did history. And Tom was a guest on the show, so you can dig back through and listen to that episode again. See, I'm promoting your episodes.
Thank you.
So, anyway, Peter wrote to us and he said, what's going on? Like, this would have been 2016. Like, this BL is everywhere now. Like, what's going on? Maybe we need to take a deeper look. And I thought about it briefly, and I'm like, well, I could do something. And because I was a tenured professor, I was associate professor at the time, and my university has a budget for doing that kind of thing, which is really rare. And so basically, I spent 6 months trying to find appropriate panelists, which was really hard at the time, because there wasn't as much networking. Just because people are mostly working on one country and not others. And now there are a lot of people who are working across regions. And so I got a bunch of money from a university. I held a symposium with something like almost 24 scholars from all over the world, just focused on Asia. And then I invited 5 scholars who work on Japan to serve as discussants to kind of create a dialogue. And so that is kind of the origin story of the book. And what was really interesting about the effect of this book, and how one of the things with when I teach about Japan, I try to teach how like Japan isn't just copying. The culture is going back and forth, and influence is not as clear cut as it might seem. You know, like you can just take Tezuka Osamu, right, and you can say, oh, like, did Tezuka Osamu steal this from Disney? Did Disney steal this from Tezuka Osamu? I mean, stealing is probably not the right word, but you know, it's going back and forth. So a bunch of Japan-based scholars, mostly Japanese, came to this event from mostly Tokyo, but people came from all over Japan because it was like the first major. Well, no, that not 2010. There was one down in Oita, but Yokohama has a little easier to get to. So it was really influential. And first of all, this woman came up to me afterwards, and she spoke to me in Japanese, and she's like, she came to me on the second day. She said, I don't understand English. I thought I would come the first day and just see what I could pick up. And then I was only going to come for one day, but I learned so much and it was so fascinating. I had to stay for another day. And basically after each panel, somebody would sort of like say the main points of each thing. And I had told the panelists to do bad PowerPoints, you know, like put lots of words on them. You know, no picture, only PowerPoints, lots of words. Because there were people from all over, you know, with different levels of English. And she said, this needs to be a book in Japanese. I said, well, I can't do a book in Japanese. And she said, I will make it happen. And I said, well, okay, you can make that happen. And so that's how the first book came out. We ended up choosing around 10 of the 21 or 22 chapters that are in the English language book, and then included some chapters by Japanese scholars as well, focused on Japan to kind of contextualize in case this is your only book. And then because academic publishing, and that came out in 2019, and because academic publishing takes longer in the US, this Queer Transfigurations didn't come out until 2022, but it's in paperback as of February. So
Yay!
Yay. No, that's honestly wonderful, and I love that. And I love anytime that panelists get credit for anything, because back in my day, when I first started paneling, we were very, very important, and we were the backbone of conventions. And now conventions treat us like we're pack animals, and it's very upsetting.
Well, there is, you know, for sure. There are some of the people at this event, and there was some like master students, PhD students, mostly junior scholars, because this field is mostly younger scholars.
Yes.
There were a few more senior scholars, but not that many. It's mostly younger scholars. But there are some who also do fan conventions, and I have done a lot of fan conventions for the last couple of years. But yeah, I think anyway, about your experience, I think the panels are really important, and I love going to panels when I go to conventions. I love learning like other people's takes on things.
Yeah. I also love going to other people's panels, but yeah, that's amazing, and I'm so glad that it's out and it's accessible, and it's here. It's a thing. Now, Carola, you wrote these last couple of questions. I want you to ask them.
Oh wow, the pressure!
Yeah, I know. Oh reading your own words.
I know. Listen, I'm an author. I don't do that. I don't do that a lot. No. Yeah, so we covered that first one. Let me scroll down in the I'm following. Okay, at least I have the outline open for once. So in the introduction, BL is referred to as a world shaping genre. Can you talk a little about that and the concept of queer transfiguration in both academic as well as in fandom spaces?
Sure. Let me actually talk about queer transfigurations first, and then talk about BL as a world-shaping genre. So in academic circles, we have been using the word queer for a really long time. If you know, it really dates back to the 90s. And before that, but 90s and early 90s in academia. And basically queer in academics, we always have to define it because everybody's got their own terms. So like, why is he defining the word queer in this? Because we have to, because everybody's got their own definition.
Yes.
For me, queer is anything that is like challenging the cis heteronormative world. And so BL in this sense is queer, and that it's depicting two men together, in most cases, two men who may or may not be gay or bisexual. That's more and more, I think we've got more and more like kind of gay or bi identified characters, but in the past, they mostly were straight. And so it's queer even if the readers are mostly, I probably still the majority, but I don't know. In the case of Japan, it is definitely the majority, but the majority are cisgender, heterosexually identified women. And that's literally how they identify themselves, as cisgender, heterosexual. It doesn't mean that their, deepest, darkest fantasies might involve something else, but or deepest, brightest fantasies. I don't know. It's still queer because that's not what good women are supposed to be doing, right? They're not supposed to be, and in my work in general, like I'm looking at where this came from, right? In the 1970s, where, romantic relationships are heterosexual. Women are not supposed to talk about or think about sex. And so you challenge this by, you've got two, okay, so like, if you look at a heterosexual couple, right? If you're reading a text about a heterosexual couple and you are a cis-identified heterosexual, or you think you're cis and heterosexual, you're raised from birth to identify with a female character. And in romantic relationships, if we look in a patriarchal society like 1970s Japan, not that it's not patriarchal now, but more patriarchal. So you're identifying with somebody who's heavily constrained, right? The female character. Whereas if there's two boys, right, they're a lot freer. And then if you look at the earlier texts, most of them were set in Europe, sometimes historical places in Europe. And so it feels like the rules will be different. So you can get away with a lot more. And then if you can identify with the male characters, both of them, one of them, neither of them, you can enjoy sex, you can enjoy looking at pretty boys, all of these things. And that's not what you're supposed to be doing. So that's still queer, right? Yeah. That's still very queer. It's always been queer. It's always been about challenging gender and sexual norms. So to me, it's queer. Transfigurations, I use the word transfigurations, not from Harry Potter because, sorry, I'm making a anti-turf face. But because, transfiguration is basically, it's about change, right?
Yeah.
Transfiguration, it's used in the Bible, it's used in other contexts, it's about change. And I define transfiguration as change in transit from one place to another. And so I'm looking at how culture changes when you take it from one place to another. So if you look at, in Thailand, instead of this being basically still manga, it's it's transfigured into drama. Like BL in Thailand is primarily centered on live action dramas.
Yes, it is.
Right? Yes. And in China, it's primarily text. Yes. Right? Prose fiction. There's reasons for this, but this is how I'm using transfiguration. Now, there's a lot of other words that academics have used for a long time. They've used localization, which has a different meaning in the fan world, but localization, in academia, we're talking about, how we make things, we adapt them for local cultures. It's not a dirty word like it is in fan circles. Localization, so it's sort of like more attention to like it's circulating around the world. And then we've got words like cultural hybridity. There's a word transculturation. There's a number of words, but they're all basically about post-colonial cultures.
Yes.
this a lot of this comes out of post-colonial studies. So these these are people who are writing about India, they're writing about places in Africa, Latin America, and they're talking about colonized populations and how they engage with cultures of the former colonizers. Japan is kind of a weird situation because Japan, although Japan was occupied by the Allied powers, basically the U.S., it's never really been a colony. And so I never was comfortable with using words that are sort of rooted in concepts that are rooted in post-colonial studies. And the other thing, and see, I told you my brain is just going to keep shutting off. But so it was keep increasing, and I'm fine. I'm not tired. It's just how my brain works. But
I understand.
The other thing is all of these concepts have tended to, even though we know that culture moves in more than one direction, they tend to assume a different balance of power, and they tend to assume that culture is basically moving in one direction. And I wanted something that is not that. And I wanted a new term. And so I've been using the word transfiguration for a long time because I wanted something else.
Right.
That can apply to post-colonial experiences, but they can apply regardless of the kind of the power balance between cultures. So when I'm talking about queer transfigurations, I'm talking about BL moving around Asia or moving around the world, and it changes as it's changed by people who are bringing it themselves, or they're adapting it, they're doing things, and so that's what I'm using here, and I just want to, and anyway, it's a pretty word.
No, so I unfortunately was raised by Roman Catholics, so when you use the word transfiguration, that is something that is very, very powerful in my mind. And it's this rapturous event of radical change and divine light.
So I do reference that.
Yeah. So I really so not at all Harry Potter, but that was very, very interesting to you because unfortunately Catholic indoctrination is hard to get rid of.
Not that you haven't tried.
I did try briefly in high school, and then I gave up.
Yeah.
Well, I do think that BL has long had a special place in cultures and in the hearts of people who have very patriarchal upbringings and very kind of conservative traditional upbringings. So I think because of the restrictions that on especially on women, on girls, that this just appeals in a certain way that
no, absolutely.
Perhaps in freer cultures is great too, but I think people have come up to me and explained to me, this is it. It's because my parents were super conservative. It's because my parents were super conservative that I really like this.
No, 100%. My aunt was never big on the whole anime thing. She all thought it was satanic pornography. I mean, if she were to know what I read now, she'd be correct.
Yeah, it is. Some of it is.
Some of it is. If only she knew. But the minute she started taking away the soft stuff was the minute I was like, oh, I can do worse now.
Yeah.
So, absolutely. But I love that. I love talking about how it changes culture to culture.
Yeah.
And how it's different. Because, yes, in the U.S., it is primarily manga, but we also had a very, very thriving culture of watching it as OVAs, as anime, usually horribly, horribly dubbed.
So, but if you, and the reason that it changes is different in different cultures. So, if you go to a country like Taiwan or Korea, where they've got very similar styles of art, and there are lots and lots of people who are, even if not professionally, they're capable of drawing manga quite well, or manhwa, or whatever you want to call it. They're capable of drawing it very, very well. And so when you go to fan events, you get the same quality of you call them dojins, is that right? These I'm sorry, I call it dojinshi because that's my original research is Japan. Yeah, but dojins, like you get the dojins are so professional. Often they're so professional in quality. They're very similar to Japan. But if you go to Southeast Asia, and I've gone to events in a number of places in Southeast Asia, you may find some really nice illustrations collected in a book, but you're rarely going to find very many like manga or comics, right? That are actually in books. Part of that is like the art traditions are different. And there are comic traditions in all countries in Southeast Asia, but part of it's the art traditions are different. And part of it is like, okay, so like if you go to the Philippines, right? If you go to Manila, the people who make it to Blush, which Kirsten Santos has been involved in organizing from the very beginning. Blush is the one of the, well, it's the main BL event.
Yeah.
And the BL Blush, you know, it's capital, right? Both.
I love that.
Right? So if you go there, a lot of it's mostly most people who are there are like late teens, early 20s. I don't remember the exact percent, and I don't even want to speculate too much about gender, but there's a mix of genders, probably more cis female, more cis women than anything else. But anyway, there's a mix of genders, but most people just getting there, buying the ticket, that they spent all their money. So they're there for the party, the festival. They'll buy a couple of stickers, and at the end of the day, that's it, because they don't have money for anything else, you know. So that kind of stuff is shaping what's available as well. And then when you go to a place like China, it's easier to hide text online than it is images in somehow, right? Or it's easier to produce and share text online, right? Particularly when it was getting established in the early to mid 90s, that's what you could do. Now, you know, there's a million platforms, and if it had come at a different time, it's quite possible that something like Webtoons or something, or, you know, other like illustration sharing websites would have been what people were using. But that's not what happened. So there's any number of reasons why stuff will change, right? So that's, but the world shaping genre. So in terms, so Mizoguchi Akiko, who we've already mentioned, she published a book in 2015. I think an English version is coming out, but I don't know when. It's been published in Korean and Chinese for sure already. But she talks about BL as an evolutionary, you know, and I cite her in this, you know, she talks about it as evolutionary in the way that it has evolved. Right? Evolved from what it was many years ago. It used to be arguably homophobic in some ways, but still sometimes kind of hot ways. But who doesn't want to see two straight guys getting it on? But so it's evolved in that way. But it's, to me, BL has changed. And you know, again, I focus on Japan. BL has changed Japanese culture. I think it really significantly has changed Japanese culture. When BL was established or created in the beginning of the 1970s, one of the goals of the woman who encouraged Takemiya Keiko and Hagio Moto to create works that ended up being these things was to make shoujo manga a more literary and respected genre. And so BL emerged at a time when shoujo manga was really evolving, and it was part of the golden age of shoujo manga, right? And so in that sense, it was part of what made shoujo manga so great in the 70s. So it's creating this sort of world. In addition, okay, so like if you look at the history of like sort of lesbian and gay, later LGBT culture, now I think we're finally doing a little bit LGBTQ, but lesbian and gay culture in the early 90s. So in the early 90s, you see like film festivals, pride parades and such that start appearing. And the very first film festival, if you went to the very first lesbian and gay film festival in Tokyo in 1992, who do you think came to watch the movies? straight women. Why? Because they had grown up watching or reading BL, right? Whether you call it shonen or yaoi or whatever, they'd grown up reading BL, and they became interested in same-sex relationships. And so if you think about that, they're spending money, they're buying tickets to these things. That makes it possible to keep doing it. Right? And so in this sense, it's helping support, it's helping financially support this emerging kind of 90s lesbian and gay culture. But also in the early 90s, there was what was called a gay boom in the media, and gay really was primarily focused on men. The gay boom was sort of kicked off by a film. There was a special issue of a women's magazine called Crea on the gay renaissance, and it was just featuring like all of these TV shows and books and so forth. This is basically coming out of people who grew up as fans.
Yeah.
Right? Grew up as fans. And so this, even if it's mostly sort of objectifying gay men and it's ignoring lesbians and trans people, even if it's doing that, it's still creating positive visibility.
Yeah.
Right? And so in his review of the Japanese version of this book, this really important writer, thinker, and activist named Fushimi Noriaki, in his review of the Japanese version, he said he really does think that the BL fans, or the people who grew up, made it a lot easier for the activism of the 90s. And he was one of the people who was involved in the parades, and he was speaking and so forth. It really changed people's minds. And if you read a number of the chapters, like that focus on India and like Indonesia and so forth, these are young women primarily who are the main fans, who grew up in religious conservative cultures, and they stumble on this, hey, what is this? What's going, oh my, what is this? And they start becoming enamored with the characters, with the relationships. And if some of them, okay, so in the chapter on Indonesia, for example, Gita Prameswari writes about that some of the they're mostly Muslim women, right? Because vast majority of people in Indonesia are Muslim. Some of them are sort of trying to make this kind of separation of BL from their beliefs about homosexuality, but some of them are using BL to rethink their values. Yeah. Right. And so that is shaping the world. Right. And then if we kind of circle back to what, Amanda, what you were saying about how reading BL caused you to maybe consider other possibilities. And so it's done that for a lot of people. I mean, if you're a fan of it, it doesn't matter what country you go to. If you go to a BL specific or a Yuri specific, especially BL, but there's a lot more. If you go to a BL event, you're going to see a lot of people who are not cisgender. Yeah, a lot of people who are not cisgender. Maybe just a little not cisgender. Maybe a lot not cisgender. But there's a lot of people, and for a lot of them, based on, I did a survey online last year, because that's a direction of research that I'm sort of heading in. And a lot of people either came to a better understanding of their gender through consuming BL and possibly Yuri and other texts, or they like BL because of this. There's something relatable about it. And I think that's why for some people, and for, the various threads of anti-discourse, that's, I think, why some people find it so threatening at this point, right? That suddenly this is grooming. There was a review of Queer Transfigurations on Amazon that eventually got taken down because the person didn't buy the book. It was just literally attacking the genre in a really horribly transphobic way.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's gone now, thankfully. But it's really I think it's opening. I mean, the Japanese book is BL ga hiraku tobira, which is BL opening doors. It really is opening doors into other worlds and other possibilities. And I think that's lovely.
Yeah.
No, and you're right. It's so necessary. I mentioned being in Texas, where right now we are having many, many discussions over human rights not being human rights, and it's stressful for all of us.
Yeah.
Right,
And
right.
you're right. We had a lot of worries when I was a relatively privileged young person who came out to her friends by kissing girls in the stairwell when I was 16. You know, we've backpedaled a fair amount from the relative luxury I had growing up.
Mm.
And I think it's so much more important now to root ourselves in the scholarship, to root ourselves in these
Yeah.
narratives, to actively fight discourse. I mentioned this. We had a whole pro-ship, anti-ship episode, and I mentioned very firmly, I think the big thing that we need to do is we need to stop that old fawn response that we had, which is to leave, is we need to actively start denouncing this where it stands. So I think that this is incredibly important, especially now,
Yeah.
to help us, root ourselves in knowledge, because it's one of the best tools for disarmament that we have. Because many people don't want to have a meaningful conversation with us. They don't. I mentioned this I do a literature show with a friend, and I said the problem with fascists is that fascists don't want to learn.
Yeah. And it's very much the same with antis. Like we've talked about this, how you can link them to the academics, to the
Right.
scholars, to the PDFs. They're not going to read them because they are stuck in their own little confirmation bias. But the
Right.
fact that there's research and that it's out there, it is available, you can educate yourself, and that is
Mhm.
incredibly important.
Absolutely. Carola, do you want to ask your other question? Or do you want
I
me
mean,
to?
I think we've sort of covered it, because the next question is also from the introduction, stating
Yeah.
that BL is getting queerer and queerer. I think
That's true.
you largely covered that, but if there's anything you want to add to that statement, that BL is getting queerer and queerer.
Well, I don't know if this makes it queer, but one of the things, and I'm sure you're aware of this, but and this goes back to what I was talking about, how culture is moving in multiple directions.
Mhm.
It's so okay. Sorry, 1970s BL emerges right at the beginning in 1970s slash fiction. A couple years later, right? And then somehow they keep going, and we've got crossover fans eventually when the internet and stuff makes this possible. But then you've got Omegaverse, which appears, and Omegaverse has worked its way into BL. And I know I think some Omegaverse stuff is being translated in English now, right?
Yes.
So like, it's being, Omegaverse is pretty queer, right? If you're challenging
For something that was so largely co-opted by cis-het women, it sure feels on the nose very queer.
Yeah. So, and then if you're going and you're actually changing BL, if you're reshaping BL in what seems to be the home of BL, right? But it's breaking down. It's breaking down, the borders. Tom Bodnet has said, and other people have said, that Japan is no longer really the center of BL. It's one of the centers.
Yeah.
BL. And it's the center of certain kinds of BL. And then, then dramas are mainly, Thailand is the biggest one, but, they're coming from other places. And of course, Japan is ramping up its dramas because they're like, hey, wait, there's fans here that want this? What? Oh, yeah, we can do this.
And then Damme is huge.
Right.
I think that that's also interesting, like how, because when we talk about BL as a global phenomenon, that how it is now bleeding into one another, and how the global BL is affecting the Japanese BL and the genre as a whole, because we have so many opportunities, and people are bringing their own cultures and their own backgrounds and experiences into the genre and then reshaping it. So like you're saying, like how a Megaverse has been translated into Japanese BL and then becoming its own thing. And I'm not going to pretend like I'm a Megaverse scholar, because that's Amanda's field.
Yes, I am a Megaverse scholar.
but I think, it is a much more global and kind of more like a push and pull situation than it was a few years ago. It's not as homogenous.
Right. But so that's what Amanda was saying earlier, something about how she feels maybe not so good that manga artists in Japan are aware of some of this negative discourse. But I'm not happy that there's so much negative discourse, but I think it makes sense that artists are, I think it's a good thing that artists are aware of their global fans. When I was in Paris for YCon, the artist, and now this is so embarrassing, but I don't think she speaks English, so she won't be listening to this. But she wrote about a genderless danshi, or my androgynous boyfriend. Yeah. What is her name?
My God, I know.
It's Tamiko.
Tamiko, yeah.
Yeah. So Tamiko was invited to this event by the publisher of the translation, who paid for her trip, and she was very interested in what people thought of her work, and she was very interested in engaging with French fans. So, I think a lot of artists are. They're curious, and that's not BL, but it is very BL adjacent.
No, you're right, and I think that that's a valid way to frame it. Is that I agree. I am glad that mangaka and other artists around the world are aware of our petty squabbling.
But it also isn't like this is a new thing, because if you look back at the early 90s and you had the whole yaoi ronso, like the yaoi debate, like it's not like it's new. They've been around.
I think my current angst is that it's affecting them in such a negative way. And I'm very much I'm a PR person in the day, so in my head it's such a bad representation of what fans and fan culture can be. And like that part, just like deeply, like stop it! They're giving us stuff,
Yeah.
But this has been incredibly illuminating, and not just because the sun is finally rising because it's 8:30.
There is no sun here. We don't have any sun here. It's
no,
sun soon. What? It's June, right?
It's June.
It's June, but Norway is special. We don't have summer anymore. We have two seasons. We have rainy season and we have winter. And like it's still snowing in some parts of the country, so we're having a great time. It's so much fun.
I'm sorry.
So, we do have daylight now, so but it's mostly raining.
So I learned so much.
I'm glad.
Oh my goodness. Carola, do you have any other questions that we should ask as we wind down?
I mean, I have a lot of questions. No, but mainly, do you have any research or current projects or anything that you would like to promote before we go?
Yeah, let's see. Okay, so there's probably nobody, well, there could be people listening. If you're actually grad students or you're early career scholars, don't do what I did, which is edit a whole bunch of different books and get lost and forget to finish your main book, monograph. And I've had a contract with the University of Hawaii Press to publish my monograph, which is looking at the radical feminists, like the emergence of radical feminism, the lesbian community, and shonen ai in the 70s, and kind of like tracing it from the 70s and 80s and kind of looking at the parallels and the overlaps, to give a better kind of contextualization of all three of them, because this is a time when women are challenging patriarchy in these different ways. And that's actually where I came up with the word transfigurations from. And so this book, I finally submitted the manuscript. I've had a contract forever. So that should be coming out at the probably early next year. And I'm not sure, the title is still kind of subject to change, but it's something like Transfiguring Women in Late 20th Century Japan. So please, keep an eye out for it. It should be good. I spent a long time on it.
I'm very excited now. I'm like, yes, this is exactly what I need on my shelf.
Yeah, I'm also very excited. You are definitely, when we talk about the baseball cards of academics, you are definitely one of them.
I know nothing about baseball cards, but you're like a shiny Pokemon card.
Okay.
Baseball cards are Pokemon cards for straight people.
Okay.
But
Oh,
thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you
Thank you
for
so much.
enduring our rabid fangirling.
It was a delight. Thank you.
Oh.
Where can
It
our
really was.
audience find you and all the wonderful things that you do?
Honestly, if you just Google James Welker Japan or James Welker manga or James Welker lesbian or James Welker feminist, it just comes up. So you can find me. But I mean, I'm on Twitter. I'm on Instagram. Twitter, I don't know. It's something like at James Welker. There might be an underscore between James and Welker because it's old. It's an old account. And on Instagram, which is just mostly flower pictures and pictures of beer, is James in Yokohama, all one word. And yeah, those are my main things, I think. So.
And we will definitely have applicable links in the description below. Thank you so much for being on the show. We greatly appreciate it. Carola, would you like to tell the listeners at home what we're covering for our birth month?
Will I? Do I even know? Oh my god, it was such a
We had a
chaotic graphic.
meeting.
I know we had a meeting, but my brain. Wait. Yes, I knew this. I just had to double check. This is my level of professionality. Okay, listen, I'm struggling. To celebrate the month of our birth and our aging husks, I guess we're going to be talking about representation in BL.
Yeah. It was a topic that we covered on the old show, but I think we can definitely do a little bit better now that I have a co-host that likes BL.
I also think that a lot of things, because there's so much change that is happening,
Absolutely.
as we've discussed in this episode. So there's probably a lot of things that have happened since that episode.
Completely. So hopefully we will make you proud as we talk about representation next month.
We'll try. We'll do our best.
You can support the show at patreon.com/the Yaoi Shelf, where there are behind-the-scenes exclusives, ability to vote on what we wear for Halloween, and completely unhinged content.
Very
We will have
unhinged
links
content.
to Dr. Welker's everything in the description below. And as always, thank you so much for being on the show. Yes.
Thank
Before
you.
we go, I just want to remind everyone that we're doing a giveaway. So, go on over to our Twitter and help us celebrate 2,000 followers and 20K listens on the podcast.
Yes.
We want to give you some stuff, so come and tell us about your favorite BL tropes.
Yes.
Yes.
As we always say, thank you for listening. Stay safe out there. We'll see you in the next one.
Thank
Bye.
you so much. Bye.
Bye.